Philosophical Mysticism, a spiritual handbook for mankind, simplified to 100 short lessons. Manipulative artifacts. So first up, what are artifacts? Why take it? Artifacts involve the mind being extended into the external world and are products of such extension. Memes are also artifacts, but I'll be focusing on artifacts that take the form of objects or items. So I'm not really going to be focusing on memes here. I'm going to be focusing on artifacts that can take the form of objects or items. Artifacts as objects or items are man-made and usually have some intention in being made. So a man-made object is going to have some intention. The effects of artifacts may change, but there's always some original intention present, even if hidden. There's always some, if it's man-made, if it's a object or item, there's always going to be some intention. Or artifact as an object or item, there's always going to be some intention. But this intention need not be a conscious intention in the artificer or human designer. The intention could be unconscious. It doesn't have to necessarily be a conscious intention. But there is always going to be some intention, even if it's sort of hidden. There are religious artifacts, which in most cases carry the intention that God or some God or gods or godlike figures be instantiated in the mind. Though this may be masked by aesthetic or ceremonial effects. So you might, see a statue of some god as ceremonial, or you might see it as aesthetic and beautiful. But really what's going on, it's causing you to instantiate the idea of a god or gods or something like that in the mind. So it's hidden, it's masked by the aesthetic or ceremonial effects, but the intention's still there. There are also non-religious artifacts, and very many of them, more so than at any other point in history. So we have religious artifacts, and we have non-religious artifacts, and a lot more religious artifacts now, or non-religious artifacts now than we've ever had before. Going far back, a lot of artifacts were just religious artifacts. But now, in modern times, we have non-religious artifacts, and there's a lot of them. Both ideas and memories can be relayed as artifacts and interacted with in the external world. So remember, the mind in philosophical mysticism, the mind is pretty much memories and ideas. That's what the mind is. And both memories and ideas can be relayed as artifacts, and you can interact with these memories and ideas through artifacts in the external world. So, for instance, a book is an artifact. If read, can instantiate the certain ideas in the mind. So you can instantiate the ideas through the artifact. A photo or a painting or a statue can share certain memories. Art as an artifact can express and induce certain emotions in the observer. An artifact can also cause certain behaviors, especially if inciting this behavior was intended by the artificer. So, for instance, a billboard can cause us to buy specific products. So the billboard's an artifact, and it causes us to buy, a certain product, commercial product or whatever. So it sort of influences our behavior. The replication of artifacts. Something very peculiar, in my view, is that due to there being so many artifacts, especially now, along with limitations to human influence and potential exposure, including our ability to instantiate ideas as well as remember things or remember whatever, or memories. So there's all these artifacts, and we have certain human limitations to memories and influence. Um, because of this, competition is created amongst various artifacts. Those that can influence us go extinct. Those that can influence us thrive. Another way artifacts can be effective is by many copies of them being made and spread throughout the world. That's a good way to survive. Interestingly, the way to do this is to incite humans into actually making new physical copies of the artifacts, and as many as possible. Because human production is limited, so if you want to sort of make lots of artifacts, you can only make so many. Because human production is limited, it creates further competition in deciding which artifacts will be created and mass produced. So there is some limit to production. And because of this, it's going to create some competition amongst artifacts. You can't produce everything. Artifacts as species. Sort of building on this, due to limitations to human influence and potential exposure, by our brains are limited, as well as limitations to human production is limited, a kind of Darwinian fitness is created between competing artifacts. In many ways, successful artifacts will function like a natural species. And again, just like natural species, like you produce way more artifacts that can survive, right? You produce way more than you could possibly, with mass production, you produce way more than you could possibly need. So not all the artifacts are going to survive. And there are selective pressure on these artifacts. So it sort of has our sort of Darwinian fitness is in play here between artifacts. And the artifacts, successful artifacts, will function like a natural species. So all this being sort of considered, it could then over time lead to artifacts taking on a life of their own, losing or hiding the original intention in favor of promoting its own spread within the human species. So the intention sort of gets lost. They start promoting their own spread for the sake of spreading, rather than bringing about the intention. The production, and what happens is the production of more copies of the artifacts being a byproduct necessary to continue this spread. So kind of some interesting stuff going on here. But the real purpose of artifacts as a species would be survival and maximal replication rather than just spreading for the sake of humans. So they would function to preserve their own existence rather than human existence. Sometimes even proven detrimental to human interest. And like some, simple deleterious examples, tanning beds, corsets, scratch lottery tickets, tabloids, cigarettes. These are all artifacts. And in many cases, these tend to be kind of bad for people to have, or to acquire or use or whatever. Manipulative artifacts. In my view, over time, I'm speculating a little bit here, but I think this is going on. Over time, artifacts would find that the best way to ensure their spread would be to provide meaning to humans, fabricated or otherwise. And religious artifacts do this quite well. So, for example, due to the meaning it provides, there are more copies of the Bible as artifacts than there are humans in the world. Very, 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 very successful artifact here. Non-religious artifacts can do the same. Same thing. So, for example, national flags and sports paraphernalia, due to their meaning, are highly successful replicators. There are, for instance, many more American flags than there are Americans, and more football jerseys than there are fans. So obviously, if there's more than needed, there's some type of additional impetus besides just, fulfilling human interests. The artifacts are fulfilling their own interest, or replicating for the sake of replicating. Because the meaning that artifacts provide is false, or only a means to promote the continued replication and preservation of those artifacts, it is a type of manipulation. We might not realize it, we might not be aware of it. We might just say, oh, we just want this stuff, all these items, objects, we just want them. But it's a type of manipulation. But something very interesting and disturbing is happening. I think certain collections of different types of artifacts are working together to create irresistible meaning. So, for example, money and cars and jewelry and clothes, they sort of come in an irresistible package, telling you that you need them to be happy. And many people are susceptible to this type of manipulation. And it's going on. It's happening to probably a good number of people in the world. And it's another interesting thing, it's one of those few cases in nature where cooperation between species happens on a large scale. Remember, artifacts can be species. So what's going on with this sort of irresistible meaning is that there's a sort of rare thing in nature where you have species that are cooperating on a large scale. Why? Why is this happening? Why should this happen? Well, I take it the reason this is happening has to do with the difficulty of manipulating the human organism and providing false meaning. It's hard. I mean, we might not think it because manipulation happens all the time between humans, but it's actually pretty difficult to manipulate someone. It's very difficult to manipulate a human being, at least a rational, normal human being. It's quite hard to manipulate them and give them false meaning. I mean, we see it all the time, but it's actually quite difficult. And the psychopaths or whoever are manipulating other people, they're putting a lot of thought into it. It's hard. And it's hard for artifacts to do as well. So it's difficult for one species of artifact to do alone. So cooperation between artifacts is encouraged by nature in order to successfully manipulate human beings. So the artifacts, at least some artifacts, are going to work together to manipulate humans because they can't do it by themselves. And maybe jewelry isn't really enough to provide false meaning for you. Maybe it's not enough. But if you add clothes to that, and you add a mansion, nice house, and cars, and money, and fancy wine and champagne, and yachts, and all this other stuff, you could sort of take this as a package. It could overwhelm you. It has enough force to sort of override your sensibilities. And it can sort of fool you into thinking that you need these things. And the more you get, the more you want. You're going to need more and more and more. This can and does happen, and it does happen on a big scale. Irresistible meaning. As associations of artifacts develop, eventually being embedded into society, and it's just a fact that there are associations of artifacts that sort of cluster together, and they're part of our society. So as they become embedded into society, I take it, a type of primitive consciousness or unconsciousness develops within complex webs of cooperating artifacts. The artifacts then derive their own intentions and values, and certain states of affairs become better or worse for them. This thing can happen. I mean, it might be like parasitic on human consciousness, human desires, maybe even unconscious human desires, but something like this is going on. Something like this is sort of taking shape or has taken shape. Again, like I said, it could still be parasitic on human consciousness, but there's some weird sort of thing going on between complex webs of cooperating artifacts. When this happens, artifacts are given their own value by humans and may be taken to have intrinsic value, even in the cases of items or objects of non-religious worship. So, I mean, it makes more sense with religious artifacts, but non-religious artifacts could easily do the same. Could easily manipulate you in the same way. And we sort of get coerced or tricked into giving these artifacts intrinsic value. Of course, the artifacts don't have intrinsic value. I mean, objects or items don't have value outside of how humans use them. But we take them to have intrinsic value. By doing this, we give artifacts sort of certain power over us. This is where artifacts flourish the most in the external world, when humans give them intrinsic value. So when we give them intrinsic value, or we hold them to have intrinsic value, the artifacts are going to do quite well. One way for artifacts to ensure they are valued by humans is to convince them that they are somehow part of or necessary for a person to have purpose, meaning, or happiness. And, if you look around, a lot of people think if they don't have a nice car, they're not happy. You could easily be manipulated in this way. So if we sort of give these objects, these items, really, they're useless outside of human needs. But if we give these items value, these objects value, then they have a certain power. If they could somehow find their way into our sort of assessment of what purpose or meaning or happiness is in life, fill that void, then they're going to have power over us. In this way, an artifact can become part of a person's very identity. This is the prime avenue of manipulation and the most an artifact could ever hope for. Once the artifact's in like this, I mean, it has control. I mean, of course, there's certain degrees here. Fetishism is one of the highest degrees. But once it gets in like that, once it sort of gets us in, it can sort of continue to grow in its power over time. This is where it gets kind of even more serious. This can create a feedback loop where certain artifacts or collections of artifacts are consciously desired by a person, while at the same time shaping the person's future conscious desire for the same artifacts. So a feedback loop could be created. It could even be like unconscious as well. A feedback loop could be created where the artifacts actually behave. The feedback loop causes you to behaviorally bring about or seek out those same artifacts. So once you get like this feedback loop going, you're going to sort of keep wanting more and more and more and more. And the sort of hole gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's actually going to influence your desires that you have. You're going to think those desires are coming from you, but really it's from the feedback loop. Thus, artifacts can shape a person's conscious self. So your actual conscious self can be shaped by artifacts. I think this is going on. You sort of hear a lot of religions say, you should sort of stay away from material possessions and items, material objects, stay away from materialism. Sure, but I think it's actually a lot more serious than even like the religions say. Because for the religions, they're sort of taking the objects, the items to be impotent. But they actually might be some actual movement or intentional, maybe not intentional, but there's some that the artifacts can actually, through their own means, manipulate us to do certain things or to desire them or create more of them. So the religions kind of got it a little bit, but it's actually a lot more serious than even the religions say. This idea of like materialism and the artifacts. The artifacts aren't like, impotent. They have power. They really do have power. And this is kind of scary. If you take this seriously, this is kind of scary. Just sort of in this this lesson, beware. Be on alert. Know that artifacts, or at least some artifacts, not all, are manipulative. They're species of nature. And they're there to manipulate you. And due to the frailty of the conscious self and human desperation to find meaning anywhere they can, artifacts are able to pull it off. They are. We've seen this. We see this if you look around what's going on right now. It's only going to get worse. In the future, it's only going to get worse. As more and more artifacts come into existence, as mass production increases, which it will, as globalization continues to increase, so you can sort of spread the artifacts to more and more people easily throughout the entire world, where before it might have been limited to a sort of local area. Now you could send any artifact anywhere in the world. So you get the mass production, you got globalization, and plus, the artifacts are getting more and more complex as well. And this is only going to give them even more and more sway over us, over our conscious selves, which is kind of vulnerable right now. People are searching for meaning, and artifacts can easily fill this void. They can easily give you meaning. But again, it's false meaning. You're being manipulated, but it could do this. This is sort of like just like a heads up. Sort of take this seriously. Something to consider. If you want to learn more, check out the book Philosophical Mysticism, A Spiritual Handbook for Mankind by Nicholas Schroeder. Definitely worth a read.